The Louisiana air was thick that morning, wet with fog, heavy with silence. The kind of silence that only exists just before something is discovered. It was still dark when a patrol officer drove along U.S. Route 90, a stretch of highway that cut through black swampland like a quiet vein. Ahead, headlights caught twisted chrome. Shattered glass sparkled faintly like insect eyes on the asphalt. A Buick Electra had collided violently with the rear of a slow-moving tractor trailer. Its pink paint was barely recognizable beneath the wreckage. The front of the car had been shorn clean off, disappearing beneath the truck's undercarriage. It looked like something not so much crashed as devoured. And then, the officer saw it. A patch of platinum blonde hair, matted, red-stained, lay near the windshield. At first glance, it appeared to be a scalp, gruesomely detached, a suggestion that someone had been decapitated in the crash. A wig, yes, but soaked, too soaked, still warm. Later, headlines would scream it, "Jayne Mansfield beheaded in car crash." The image of it, her hair, her glamour, her head severed on the highway like some tragic Hollywood sacrifice, seared itself into the American imagination. Never mind that it wasn't true, or at least not entirely. The truth was murky, elastic, like the mist rising around the wreck. The official autopsy would claim crushed skull with avulsion of cranium and brain. But what did that mean to the public, to the headlines, to the ghost story? In the back seat, miraculously, 3 children survived. One of them, a young girl with dark eyes, would grow up to be actress Mariska Hargitay. She has no memory of the crash, only the weight of what followed. Jayne's lawyer would say she had plans the next morning. Her manager claimed she was expected in New Orleans. Her last known photograph, taken hours earlier, shows her smiling, made up, exhausted. She looked radiant. She looked like someone ready to vanish. And vanish she did. There was something uncanny about how Jayne Mansfield died. Not just the violence of it, but the timing, the theatrics. The crash occurred just past 2 a.m., a witching hour in its own right. One moment, she was in a nightclub, laughing, lipstick perfect. Hours later, she became an icon of death. The details read like an urban legend. A trailer without a proper underride guard. A fog of mosquito spray thick enough to blind a driver. A child actor sleeping in the back seat. A famous woman's wig torn loose like a crown toppled by fate. In photos of the scene, Jayne's personal items lie scattered on the ground, heels, cosmetics, a compact mirror cracked down the middle. In that mirror, one could almost imagine it still reflecting something, a mouth mid-sentence, a set of eyes wide with anticipation or fear. Mirrors have long been symbols of self-image, vanity, even truth. And for Jayne, the mirror had always been more than a tool, it was her arena. She was 34 when she died. But death, in this case, didn't simply erase her, it multiplied her. In dying, Jayne became legend. And legends are rarely accurate. They are shaped by need, by rumor, by longing. In the case of Jayne Mansfield, her death didn't end the performance. It simply blurred the line between who she was and who the world needed her to be. There were no seatbelts. There were no second chances. Just a wig on a wet road and a silence that would never be fully explained. Before she was tragedy incarnate, before the highway, before the wig, Jayne Mansfield was a symphony of intention. A woman made not of accident, but of obsession. Not the dumb blonde she played so effortlessly on screen, but a calculating architect of her own mythos, assembling herself piece by deliberate piece. She knew what people wanted, and she gave it to them in excess. Her entrance into Hollywood was not quiet. She arrived in the early 1952nd like a siren painted in technicolor tight sweaters, squealing laughs, and curves carved for the camera. While Marilyn Monroe simmered with melancholy allure, Jayne was something louder, pinker, almost cartoonish, a parody of sex wrapped in satin. But unlike most rising stars, Jayne had read the rule book and promptly rewrote it. She held a degree in drama. She played the violin. She spoke 5 languages. She was, by all accounts, brilliant, yet she chose to hide it. When asked a philosophical question in an interview, she once replied with a giggle and a flick of the hair, "I don't know, darling. I just love bubble baths." She weaponized underestimation. Hollywood men didn't know what to do with a woman like that. They saw only the surface, the plunging necklines, the dumb blonde gimmick. But Jayne was already 2 steps ahead. She orchestrated her own publicity stunts, pretending to lose her bikini top in a pool, arriving at red carpets with a wardrobe designed to fail. Walking dogs died to match her dresses. She was tabloid catnip, and that was the point. To her, the media was a tool, not a threat. She kept clippings of every headline about herself, good or bad, and pinned them to a wall in her home, like trophies. There were thousands. She once said, "If you're going to do something wrong, do it big, because the punishment is the same either way." It wasn't just a quote, it was a worldview. Jayne understood fame as theater, a set, a script, a costume, and she inhabited her role fully, until even her lovers couldn't tell where the mask ended. She wasn't just acting in films, she was performing her own life, and yet something hung behind her eyes. A restlessness, a grief. Because while she dazzled the world, her private life was unraveling, marriages disintegrating, roles diminishing. She longed to be taken seriously, yet the studios kept her in parody roles. Even as she was photographed more than any other woman in 1957, more than the First Lady, more than Marilyn, she was being edged out by the very machine she once controlled. Fame had changed, and Jayne, for all her brilliance, was starting to look like the past. In the shadows, newer blondes emerged, more subdued, less scandalous. The public grew weary of pink palaces and publicity stunts. They wanted vulnerability, not vaudeville. And Jayne, whose body had been currency now, found herself overspent. She tried to reinvent. She took roles overseas, performed in nightclubs, posed for Playboy again. But the glow was dimmer now, the camera less forgiving. It is said that fame devours its architects, and Jayne's fame was beginning to turn inward like a house of mirrors with no exit. And still, she smiled. And still, she posed. At a press event, someone asked her what kept her going. She looked directly into the lens and replied, "I have a dream. I have more to do. People think they've seen everything I have to offer, but they haven't." That was less than a year before the crash. Looking back, her life feels not like a rise and fall, but like a slow spiral, elegant and eerie, as if she were being gently pulled into the very myths she created. The illusion was never just blonde. It was brilliant, and perhaps it was too perfect to last. Before the pink palaces and perfume-drenched headlines, there was Vera Jane Palmer, a girl from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, who scribbled Latin conjugations on her bedroom mirror with her mother's lipstick. Her father died when she was just 3, a violinist whose absence echoed through the rest of her life like the final note of a song never finished. She clung to memory like other children clung to dolls. In her teenage years, her notebooks were filled with Shakespearean monologues and half-finished poems, musing on fate, on death, on identity. She would study her face in the mirror for hours, tilting it under different lights, whispering lines from Hamlet like spells, not out of vanity, but curiosity, as if she were searching for something, some truth beneath the layers of flesh and bone. At the University of Texas, she studied drama and languages fluent in Spanish, German, even Latin. She read Freud before her classmates knew how to spell his name. But it wasn't the intellect she polished for the world, it was the outline of a woman she was still inventing. Her notebooks began to include sketches of gowns, lipstick swatches, profiles of starlets, but always, in the margins, Latin. Fiat voluntas tua, let thy will be done. There was an early marriage to Paul Mansfield, a kind man with narrow dreams. She took his last name but carried her own vision. After the birth of their daughter, she moved west. She had read that the Warner Brothers studio gate had brass lettering and red tiles, and she wanted to see it up close. She worked as a movie extra, a receptionist, a model, but at night, in their cramped apartment, she would recite entire monologues in the mirror, painting her lips in between scenes. Her daughter, sleeping in the next room, would later describe waking up to the sound of her mother practicing laughter, each version slightly different, until she found the one that felt irresistible. The mirror again. Always the mirror. There's something sacred about mirrors for women in performance. More than just reflection, their rehearsal, confession, confrontation. For Jayne, they were portals. The line between the girl who read Latin and the blonde who kissed cameras blurred more each year. It wasn't that she abandoned who she was. She simply rewrote the text, rephrased the poetry until the syllables fit the screen. Even when the world laughed, thinking they saw a joke in her curves, Jayne was translating from the inside out, turning brain into body, ambition into softness, Latin into lipstick. She once said, "A woman should be a cook in the kitchen, a lady in the living room, and a wild animal in the bedroom." But those were only the masks lines given to the press, performances for men who needed simple categories. Privately, she read Nietzsche. She lit candles on Tuesday nights and wrote letters she never mailed to her father, to God, to herself. One of them, found later in an old scrapbook, simply read, "All beauty fades, but the mirror keeps it for a little while longer." It is perhaps no coincidence that when the crash occurred, among the items scattered on the roadside was a small handheld mirror, its handle cracked but the glass unbroken. Officers found it near the passenger door, faint traces of fingerprint powder on the back. Had she been holding it, looking into it, or was it simply following her, the way some reflections refuse to die? We think we know Jayne Mansfield, the platinum, the scandal, the car. But before the wig, before the wreckage, there was a girl who studied dead languages and talked to mirrors in the dark. And perhaps, in some strange way, she never stopped. Jayne Mansfield's life read like a fevered contract, signed in lipstick and sealed in champagne. But behind the hyper-colored imagery was something colder, structured, even surgical. She did not fall into fame. She brokered it, and every man who touched her seemed to walk away, altered, bruised, or burning. She married 3 times, loved more than that. Some say she never stopped performing, even in private. Others say she never dropped the act, because there never was an act, only masks layered so thick, no one ever saw her skin. Miki Hargitay, the Hungarian bodybuilder turned Mr. Universe, was her second husband, and perhaps the most publicly claimed. They posed together like Greco-Roman statues cast in lacquered gold. His muscles, her curves, a living parody of love sculpted for the tabloids. But the cracks showed early. She called him too obedient. He called her unknowable. Before Miki, there was Paul Mansfield, the forgotten husband, the father of her first child. She left him like one might shed a second skin, gently, unapologetically, with forward motion. After Miki, there was Matt Cimber, her third husband, a theater director who tried to remold her into serious roles. He failed, or perhaps she refused. And in between, there were many. Too many for the record, too many for safety. Her lawyer once joked that he spent more time managing her lovers than her contracts. That wasn't far from the truth. Jayne blurred intimacy and leverage. She didn't love to control. She controlled to survive. One man, in particular, stands apart from the others, not a lover, at least not in the traditional sense. Sam Brody, her attorney, her shadow, and some say her curse. Brody was abrasive, controlling. He followed her from nightclub to nightclub, carrying briefcases and whispering threats at photographers. He filed lawsuits on her behalf with such frequency that gossip columnists joked she had more court dates than movie roles. Their relationship was toxic, volatile, obsessive, maybe even codependent. He was married, so was she, but they were often inseparable. Those close to her said Brody had a dark influence, that he isolated her, that he whispered poison into her ear. Yet Jayne never pushed him away. She once told a friend that Sam made her feel like someone was always watching, and she said it like a child might speak of a ghost, under the bed equal parts fear and comfort. But Brody's presence came with consequences. Fights, bad deals, lawsuits, and most ominously, a curse. Because around this time, between nightclubs, lawsuits, and canceled gigs, Jayne began appearing in photographs with Anton LaVey, the high priest of the newly formed Church of Satan. In one iconic image, she stands beside him, grinning in a low-cut black dress while he holds a human skull. His shaved head gleams. Her eyes glitter. To some, it was a publicity stunt, just another play for headlines. But to others, It marked the beginning of her fall. LaVey claimed Jayne wanted protection, that she asked him to place a magical shield around her. In return, he demanded she cut Sam Brody out of her life. He warned that Brody was surrounded by death energy, that he would bring disaster. Jayne ignored him, and the accidents began. Minor at first, then worse. Flares of danger that felt almost scripted. Until the night of the 28th of June, 1967, when Jayne, her driver, Sam Brody, and her 3 children climbed into the Buick Electra after a nightclub show in Biloxi, bound for New Orleans. Only the children survived. The press called it an accident, a tragedy. But to those who had seen the warnings, it was something else. A prophecy fulfilled, a pact broken. In the glove compartment of that wrecked Buick, among receipts and cigarette packs, officers found a stack of legal documents, draft contracts, notes in Brody's handwriting, pages stained with rain and motor oil, and in the footwell on Jayne's side, a crushed pair of pink heels snapped clean at the arch, almost elegant, if not for the blood. In the hills of Beverly Glen, where the air feels thinner and silence can be mistaken for peace, Jayne Mansfield built her shrine, not to God, not to any man, but to herself. They called it the Pink Palace, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion drenched obsessively in blush tones. Pink walls, pink furs, pink chandeliers. Even the wine was pink, served chilled in heart-shaped glasses. From the wrought iron gates to the mailbox shaped like a poodle, it wasn't merely decor, it was doctrine. Jayne didn't just live there. She curated it. Like a memory you could walk through barefoot. Visitors recalled a scent roses, talcum, and fading sugar. The kind of sweetness that lingers too long, like a perfume worn to bed. There was a heart-shaped bathtub rumored to take 2 hours to fill. A mirrored ceiling above the master bed. Velvet drapes in every room, thick enough to muffle sound and maybe intention. It was a place where reality bent ever so slightly. But the most unsettling room wasn't the bedroom, or even the fuchsia-lit living room. It was the small alcove off the main hall, where she kept a collection of mirrors, old ones, ornate, baroque, some with blackened spots where silver had eroded like rust on truth. She arranged them like ancestors watching from every angle. And in the center stood a floor-length mirror trimmed in ivory and gold, which she called the memory gate. "I look into it," she once told a guest, "and I see everything I was before the cameras came." No one knew if she was joking. Servants reported strange things, whispers in rooms with no one inside, lights flickering without cause. One housekeeper swore she once saw Jayne walking down the main staircase in the middle of the night, talking to someone not there, her reflection visible in 3 different mirrors, but not in the one directly in front of her. By the mid-1962, the palace was beginning to peel. Fame had shifted, and with it, the money. The gigs were smaller, the roles more desperate. The house, once a symbol of ascension, became a mausoleum of the person she used to be. Paint cracked, the pool turned green, plumbing failed, and Jayne, ever theatrical, kept smiling through it all, hosting wild parties, letting the place blur into legend. But behind closed doors, she struggled. Bills piled. A foreclosure notice was rumored to have been tacked to the pink front gate, only to be removed the next morning by someone in silence. Still, she refused to let the illusion slip. Her last birthday at the Pink Palace, guests described her as luminous, almost defiant. She wore a sequined gown that shimmered like broken glass underwater. The mirrors in the alcove had been polished. She walked past them as if rehearsing a farewell. One guest found her upstairs alone that night, sitting at her vanity. A single candle flickered in the corner. The mirror before her was cracked just a hairline, but when she noticed her guest, she smiled and said, "Funny how cracks don't show in the dark, isn't it?" Later, that same guest would say she looked like she was waiting for something, or someone. After Jayne's death, the Pink Palace passed through many hands. Rock stars, mystics, photographers. Some said the house moaned in the early morning hours. That perfume would hang in the stairwell, despite the windows being open. In 2002, the house was demolished. Bulldozers arrived just after dawn, engines rumbling through rose-colored mist. One of the workers claimed that when they tore down the alcove with the mirror collection, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, though the day had been still. Nothing was left behind. No furniture, no artifacts, no trace, only the rumors and the mirrors, many of which were sold off at auction, each one now hanging in anonymous homes, quietly remembering. Because that was what Jayne Mansfield wanted more than anything, to be remembered. And in that house of pink and performance, she carved her name not in stone, but in shadow. The room smelled of incense and old books, cloaked in velvet shadows. Somewhere, a black cat paced along a bookshelf, its eyes gleaming in candlelight. In the center of the room stood a man in a priest's collar, not of God, but of something far older and far more theatrical. Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan. He didn't summon Jayne Mansfield. She came to him. It was 1966 Hollywood in its twilight, paranoia and acid seeping into the seams of glamour. LaVey had just declared the birth of a new religion, one that worshipped self, spectacle, and indulgence. His message, though cloaked in ritual, was strangely close to Jayne's own doctrine: to be seen, to command, to bend reality by will. They met through mutual fascination. He was drawn to her celebrity. She was drawn to his power. Photographs exist eerily lit, black and white stills that feel more like movie frames than reality. In one, Jayne leans against a skull, her hand resting on a candelabra. LaVey stands behind her like a conjurer, bald and unsmiling, his eyes fixed somewhere just beyond the lens. Some called it a stunt, a press ploy. Jayne was never shy about spectacle, but others, those closer, sensed something more deliberate, more dangerous. LaVey later claimed that Jayne was under his magical protection, that she had become a high priestess in his church, that together they performed rituals to secure her fame and ward off enemies. But with that protection came a price. Sam Brody. LaVey despised him, called him a vortex of misfortune, a man stained with spiritual poison. He claimed Brody mocked his rituals, insulted his beliefs, and worse, provoked the very energies Jayne was trying to contain. On several occasions, LaVey warned her, "Get him out of your life, or there will be consequences." Jayne laughed it off. She said LaVey was eccentric, a man who believed his own fiction. But something changed after one of their final meetings. Those close to her say she grew more anxious, began wearing protective charms, burned black candles late at night in the Pink Palace, avoided mirrors for days at a time. One confidant claimed Jayne told her, "I think I've done something wrong. I think I asked for too much." And then the accidents began. In early 1967, she narrowly escaped injury when a chandelier fell during a stage performance. Weeks later, her car was vandalized, tires slashed, rearview mirror shattered. Her dog died mysteriously. And Brody, ever present, seemed more aggressive. Their fights grew louder. Hotel staff would hear shouting through the walls, always ending in a strange silence. LaVey sent one final warning. He mailed her a single black candle and a note. The handwriting was severe, like carved bone. "You were warned. Remove the cancer, or the body dies." Jayne never replied. On the night of her death, she performed in Biloxi, Mississippi. Eyewitnesses say she seemed tired, strained. During a backstage moment, she reportedly looked into a dressing room mirror and said quietly, "Something's wrong with my face. I don't look like me." It was her last performance. Some believe the crash was coincidence, mechanical failure, human error, fog. But others whisper of ritual debt, of unseen forces settling a balance. Anton LaVey, for his part, never claimed responsibility, but he never denied it either. In interviews years later, he spoke of Jayne as someone touched by the current, someone who crossed a threshold without knowing how to return. "She was beautiful," he said, "and beauty is always the first thing fate takes." When asked if he believed the curse was real, LaVey smiled. "She died with him in the car, didn't she?" The implication hung in the air like a spell half spoken. In the end, there's no proof, only patterns. Coincidence shaped like design. A man obsessed with death, a woman chasing immortality, and somewhere in the dark between them, a candle that would not go out until everything around it did. Evening fell slowly over the Mississippi Gulf Coast, smearing itself across the sky in bruised tones of lavender and rust. The scent of salt and heat clung to the roadside, and mosquitoes gathered thick in the air, small humming omens. Jayne Mansfield was finishing her final nightclub performance at the Ragdoll Lounge in Biloxi. It was the 28th of June, 1967. The audience had been loud, drunk, and half-interested. Jayne wore a form-fitting lavender dress, sequined along the ribs like armor that caught the light but let the sadness bleed through. Her hair was platinum and heavy that night, styled high, but the roots were darker now. A small detail, but telling. She smiled through every joke. Blew kisses through the stale smoke. Her trademark squeal still emerged when the crowd demanded it. But there were moments, caught in the shadows between curtain and spotlight, where her expression slipped where something more ancient passed behind her eyes. She was tired, not just in the body, but in the performance, in the pretending. Backstage, Sam Brody lingered, pacing like a man who couldn't sit with silence. The children, 3 of them, including Mariska, were asleep in a hotel nearby, watched by a babysitter. The plan was to finish the gig and drive through the night to New Orleans for a television appearance the next morning. She didn't want to go. Several witnesses remember this clearly. She was supposed to fly, she said, but Brody insisted the car would be faster. They'd be fine. They'd done it before. She hesitated, asked for coffee, touched up her lipstick slowly, as though stalling time itself. By 2 a.m., they were back in the Buick Electra, a heavy car, fast, long as a boat. The children lay asleep in the back seat, swaddled in pillows and thin motel blankets. Sam sat in the passenger seat, glowering over papers he refused to put away. Jayne, exhausted, leaned into the driver, Ronald B. Harrison, a family associate, quiet, responsible. She said little, maybe nothing. They drove west, merging onto U.S. Route 90, known locally as the Bayou Road, a stretch of 2-lane highway that sliced through woods, swamps, and long shadows. The fog rolled in around 2:15 a.m. dense chemical fog, the kind that clings to glass and blinds headlights. It had been sprayed earlier that night by a mosquito truck. No one had been warned. Visibility dropped to near zero, and somewhere ahead, crawling slowly down the unlit highway, was a tractor trailer. It carried an open-top trailer used for spraying. Its taillights were low, its reflective guard almost non-existent. There were no warning signs, no brake lights, just a wall of metal emerging from the mist. The Buick never had a chance. Traveling over 80 kilometers per hour, it slammed into the rear of the truck. The front of the car crumpled instantly, folding like paper under a stone. The windshield burst. The hood tore open. The top half of the front cabin was shorn clean off, crushed beneath the undercarriage. Jayne, Harrison, and Brody were killed instantly. The children in the back seat survived, miraculously shielded by the bulk of the front seats. Mariska, just 3 years old, sustained a zigzag scar across her head, but lived. She would later say, she remembers nothing, and maybe that's mercy. The crash site was chaos. A pink blanket lay beside the road, a child's shoe, a mirror cracked in its frame, a lipstick tube still uncapped, embedded in the dashboard like a bullet, and there, tangled near the mangled windshield, was a blonde wig soaked in blood. It would become the most iconic, misunderstood image of the tragedy, misidentified as her severed head by horrified reporters, repeated by tabloids until it became gospel. But Jayne had not been decapitated. The autopsy noted massive cranial trauma, skull separation, brain avulsion, brutal, irreversible, but the head had not come off. Still, the image stuck, because myths don't need to be true to survive. They only need to feel true. And what could be more fitting for a woman who built herself in the mirror than to be remembered in fragments? That night on the Bayou Road was supposed to be a transition, one more tired journey, one more stage. But instead, it became the ending no one rehearsed for. The final act in a life where fiction and reality had long since traded places. Some say the fog wasn't just fog. Some say the truck shouldn't have been there. Some say Jayne hesitated for a reason. All we know is this: she died just before dawn, and the world never looked at a pink car the same way again. The headlines were swift, brutal, and strangely elegant in their cruelty. Jayne Mansfield beheaded in horror crash. Children survived starlet's head, found on highway. Death of a blonde bombshell. Even before her body was identified, her legend had already begun its transformation, moving from scandal to specter. The police arrived minutes after the crash, headlights slicing through the fog to reveal a wreck that looked staged, as if the set designers of a tragedy had arranged it perfectly. The pink Buick twisted beneath the trailer, metal peeled back like the skin of a fallen fruit, and so much blood spilled across the road in chaotic geometry. 3 bodies lay inside, and the wig was the seed of the myth. In the confusion, someone mistook it for her scalp. It made sense in the most horrific cinematic way. Jayne Mansfield, queen of spectacle, slain in a decapitation so theatrical it could only be real. The image, passed from officer to reporter to headline, burned itself into the collective memory before the truth could catch up. But the truth was colder, more complicated. Jayne had not been decapitated. Her skull was crushed, her brain ejected from the cranial cavity. The violence was the same, but the detail different. Yet no one seemed to want that version. It lacked poetry. It was too clinical. The wig, platinum, blood-soaked, was easier to understand. It was a symbol, a crown fallen, a goddess unmanned. In the days that followed, photographers descended upon the crash site. They stepped around drying blood to capture the pink door half torn from its hinges. They photographed Jayne's vanity case, her compact mirror, a crushed perfume bottle glinting in the dirt. Some of the photos were published. Others whispered about. One in particular, never officially released, allegedly showed the interior of the car just moments before the bodies were removed. Jayne slumped forward, her long hair tangled, her hands still painted in red polish. Those who saw it said the image felt wrong, not tragic, uncanny, like something watching back. The coroner's report was formal, brief, and distant. Name: Vera Jane Palmer. Age: 34. Cause of death: crushed skull with avulsion of cranium and brain. But the language couldn't touch the atmosphere that followed, because something else had died in that car. Not just a woman, not just a mother, but a dream, the kind made of mirrors and perfumes and scripts written in pink ink. Across the country, people reacted with morbid fascination. Radio hosts joked, tabloids salivated. Candlelight vigils were held by fans who hadn't thought of her in years. The Pink Palace in Los Angeles was flooded with letters and flowers, some addressed only to the house where the star died. Mansfield's death became a fable retold in diners, whispered in dressing rooms, speculated on by amateur occultists and Hollywood fixers alike. Some said she had been cursed. Some said the CIA was involved. Some believed she'd faked it all, escaped into obscurity, leaving behind a mannequin in her place. Because the truth that a woman could build herself from myth and still die in the dirt like everyone else was too unbearable, too ordinary. And so the story warped. She wasn't just killed. She was punished, or chosen, or erased. In time, the crash became a kind of cinematic punctuation mark, an ending so grotesque, so poetic, it felt inevitable, as if Jayne Mansfield had written it herself. And in a way, maybe she had. In her early journals found after her death, she once wrote, "I want to die beautifully. I want my ending to shimmer." She got something else, but shimmer, it did. The Buick Electra was eventually scrapped, the pink upholstery torn away, the dashboard stripped. One of the rear-view mirrors, still intact, was kept by an unnamed officer. Rumor has it, he hung it in his garage, and once claimed it fogged over the 29th of June, even in dry heat. Jayne's funeral was closed casket. The press waited outside, flashing bulbs against glass. Her body, reconstructed with effort, lay beneath a spray of red roses. They said she wore pink, but no one could remember whether it was her favorite color or just the last color we ever saw her in. In the clinical silence of the New Orleans morgue, a body lay beneath a cotton sheet, its silhouette oddly still, for someone who had once pirouetted through life in high heels and rhinestones. The tag read, Vera Jane Palmer, not Jayne Mansfield. In death, the performance ended, or so it seemed. The pathologist who conducted the autopsy described crushed cranial bones, partial avulsion of brain matter, and facial disfigurement beyond recognition, but no mention of decapitation, no confirmation of what haunted the tabloids. Still, the world believed otherwise. Why? Because it was more cinematic, because it was what a star like her deserved, or because there were details that didn't add up. First, the photos. Though official sources denied it, whispers persisted about unauthorized photographs taken at the scene, some said by local police, others by journalists who arrived minutes too soon. These images were never published in the mainstream press, but black and white copies circulated in underground Hollywood circles, blurry, gruesome, ambiguous. One, reportedly, showed Jane's wig separated from her skull, but no visible wound where a head would detach. Another allegedly showed her right hand still clutching a strand of rosary beads. That detail was never included in any police report. Second, the autopsy inconsistencies. Jane's death certificate was signed quickly within 24 hours, unusual given the high-profile nature of her death and the presence of multiple victims. Sam Brody's injuries were listed with more detail than Jane's, despite her being the focal point of national attention. The language was vague. Severe trauma, massive head injury, apparent instant death, but no forensic breakdown of impact force, no mention of time of death accuracy, no toxicology follow-up. Rumors swirled that the coroner had been pressured to avoid grisly specifics, to protect the family, to avoid further scandal. Third, the missing time. The crash was recorded at approximately 2:25 a.m., but witnesses at the Ragdoll Lounge insisted Jane didn't leave until well after 1:45 a.m., and the trip to New Orleans should have taken longer than the time recorded. Local journalists, sifting through dispatch logs, noted a 15 to 20-minute window that remained unaccounted for, time in which the car could have stopped, detoured, or simply disappeared from the record. Fourth, the silence. In the weeks following her death, no family member demanded further investigation. No lawsuits were filed against the trucking company. The children were shielded from the press so thoroughly that even seasoned journalists remarked at the eerie containment. Hollywood, once ravenous for Mansfield gossip, moved on with uncharacteristic grace. It was as if someone had closed the curtain firmly, deliberately, before the final act could be scrutinized. Theories bloomed in the vacuum: that she had survived the crash and died later under sedation, that she had overdosed hours earlier and the crash had been orchestrated as a cover, that Brody, enraged and paranoid, had played some role in steering that Buick into oblivion, and the strangest theory of all, that Jayne Mansfield had never died at all, that she had staged the crash using a body double and false documents and slipped into the ether of private life, that her death had been too poetic, too perfect, to be anything but written in advance. The FBI, when pressed decades later under a FOIA request, released a slim file on Mansfield, mostly redacted interviews, press clippings, and one curious note dated the 3rd of July, 1967. It read, "Subject known to associate with Anton LaVey. Unverified claims of esoteric practices. No national security threat at present. Why had they been watching her at all?" The autopsy didn't explain the fog that seemed to have dropped like a curtain only on that stretch of highway. It didn't explain the whispers from LaVey's inner circle that Jane had asked for protection, that a ritual had gone unfinished. It didn't explain why the documents found in Brody's briefcase were half burned, or why her driver's watch was discovered stopped at 2:12 a.m., more than 10 minutes before the official time of the crash. No single fact could be confirmed. No theory held airtight. But in the spaces between what was known and what was buried, the mystery took root, because some deaths are not clean. They are layered, folded into silence, and told only through what is not said. Jayne Mansfield's autopsy may have listed her wounds, but it didn't touch the strange coldness in the air that morning. It didn't address the feeling that something had been erased, not just a person, but a question. And perhaps that's what haunted most. Not the gore, not the wig, but the sense that the real story had vanished into the mist, and the official story was simply what was left behind. The Pink Palace is gone now, reduced to rubble and swimming pools buried under luxury condos, but something of Jayne remains. Not in the tabloids, not even in the grainy footage of her performances. She lingers elsewhere, in quiet corners, in reflectivity surfaces, in mirrors that once knew her shape. There is an old story told among those who worked on movie sets in the early 72nd. A soundstage at Universal where Jayne had once filmed a scene was being repainted. A grip swore he saw a woman in pink, standing alone by the makeup chair brushing her hair. He turned to speak, then she was gone. No one believed him. But then others started whispering, of doors left ajar, of soft humming, tuneless, distant, unmistakably feminine. Some say it was grief echoing off the walls. Others weren't so sure. In a hotel room in Las Vegas, where Jayne once stayed during a brief stage run, a maid reported finding a faint lip print on the vanity mirror each morning, despite the room being unoccupied for weeks. The imprint was never fresh. It seemed old, faded, as if kissed decades ago and only now resurfacing. That mirror was eventually removed, placed in storage. And yet, in Los Angeles, collectors still speak of owning pieces of Jayne, mirrors from the Pink Palace, a crushed compact allegedly from the crash site. One woman, a stylist, bought an antique heart-shaped mirror from an estate sale in the valley. It was etched with initials JM barely visible. She hung it in her salon. Clients said they sometimes caught glimpses of someone else behind them in the reflection. A flicker, a breath of platinum. No one could explain it. One woman fainted. The mirror was later covered, but not discarded. There's something about Jayne Mansfield that refuses conclusion. Her life, so manicured and theatrical, should have ended with finality. But it didn't. It fractured. She is not just a story of tragedy. She is a mirror of the culture that consumed her. The desire for beauty, the hunger for spectacle, the denial of aging, of sadness, of silence. She was everything a woman was told to be, until she became too much, and the world turned away. Even her daughter, actress Mariska Hargitay, has spoken rarely of the crash. When she does, her words are careful, measured, as though naming the ghost might give it form. And perhaps that is Jayne's final performance, a life so saturated with image and invention that even her absence becomes its own kind of presence. You don't have to believe in ghosts to feel one. Just sit in front of a vanity mirror, alone. Turn the lights low. Apply lipstick slowly, and ask the reflection, who are you pretending to be? Jayne Mansfield died before she reached 35. But the reflection she left behind, it's still performing, still smiling, still waiting for the next act.